My name is Alex Wu. I co-wrote and directed a new Netflix animated feature film called In Your Dreams, which came out about a month ago. And I also am the CEO and co-founder of Kuku Studios, which is a small independent animation studio based in Berkeley, California.
Awesome. Could you tell me about your journey before this film, which obviously will be the heart of our discussion, but I want to hear about you as a creator before that.
Yeah, so prior to this film, I executive produced and created a show called Go Go Corey Carson, which was a kids show on Netflix. We started production on that in 2018. It was our company's first production. It launched globally on Netflix in 2020, and then we had 6 seasons, 3 holiday specials, and a mini movie, and the show ended up winning 3 Emmy Awards, and we got nominated for 8. And that's actually what led to In Your Dreams, because I think Netflix was so pleased with what we were doing that they wanted to, be in business with us. So prior to that, we started the company in 2016, and before we started the company, I was a story artist at Pixar. So I worked on films like Ratatouille and WALL-E, Cars 2, The Good Dinosaur, and Finding Dory. And then before Pixar, I worked at Lucasfilm Animation for George Lucas, and I was a director in development there. So I had, when I was in film school, I went to NYU for film school. My senior thesis film won a Student Academy Award, and that sort of put me on the map in the industry. One of the producers at Lucasfilm Animation saw the film, liked it, arranged a meeting with me, and George Lucas had a small division called Lucasfilm Animation at the time, and it was basically a development team that would develop original ideas for feature animation. And the intent was that Lucasfilm would take these ideas and then produce them to compete with companies like Pixar, with DreamWorks, Disney. But none of those films actually ever got made. So I was there with maybe 4 or 5 other directors who were also in development. We pitched our projects to George Lucas. He passed on all of them. And so after that, I decided I wanted to work on movies. I didn't want to be stuck in development, so I applied to Pixar and I got in. And then before that, I was at NYU. I studied film there. And before New York, I was in Hong Kong. I went to high school here. I went to Chinese International School. Hong Kong is like my home. So it's really great to be back here.
Welcome. Cool. So I want to talk about In Your Dreams.
Yeah.
Your role as a director.
Yeah, I co-wrote it, directed it, also created the story. Yeah.
So I feel like different directors have expertise in different things, or like they're the strongest, and some are really strong in storytelling.
Yeah.
Some are really technically strong.
Yeah.
Like they really, want to manage the pipeline workflow, or they want to manage the effects.
Yeah.
In the field. What kind of director do you feel like you are? Like, what's your focus? Is it story?
I do. Yeah. I mean, because I spent so much time in the story department at Pixar, I really honed those skill sets. So, by trade, I'm a storyboard artist. And so storyboard artists, they have many skills. I mean, you basically have to sort of be a cinematographer, because you have to think about, the cameras you're using, the shots you're using. You also have to be some sort of like an animator, because you have to draw all the expressions of your characters within the frame. And you have to think about also story structure. You have to be a writer, because you have to think about not just the writing in your sequence, but also the overall shape of the story and how your sequence fits into the overall context of the larger story. So I'd say those are sort of my strong suits, like story, cinematography and camera, and then animation. So of those departments, during the pipeline, I felt like those were the departments that I sort of just came the most naturally to me.
So I have to confess, I haven't spoiled myself with the story in your dreams. But I wonder if, like, because dreams are inherently a little jumpy, logical, they break from reality a bit. How did you kind of present that, or what was your way of cueing to, you know, the audience, like making that work as well, but also keeping maybe the style visually coherent?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions. I mean, you should just watch the movie and you can tell me whether or not I did. But I think, I mean, that was the biggest challenge with this movie, was even just getting it greenlit. Because every animation studio at some point has had an idea about a movie that takes place in the world of dreams, because it's such a universal human experience, right? People across time and culture dream. We still don't know why we dream, so it makes it great material for fiction and mythology. But the challenge is that in dreams, like you said, there's no rules, it's illogical. Anything can happen, and when anything can happen, nothing really means anything. So there wasn't a single, at least Western animation studio, that sort of cracked the code on how to give a dream movie stakes. And for us, the way I solved that problem was to expand on this mythology of the Sandman character. I don't know if you know about the Sandman, but it's like Scandinavian mythology or folklore about where dreams come from, and the Sandman is the giver of dreams. So the folklore is that when you go to sleep, he comes and he sprinkles sand over your eyes, which is why in the morning you wake up with those crusties. But that sand, that magical sand that he sprinkles over your eyes, is how he gives you dreams. And I thought that was such a cool idea. For this film, I thought if we expanded on that and said, if you can find the Sandman in the dream world, he can make your dreams come true. And then suddenly we had a way to connect what happens in the dream world with what happens in the real world. Suddenly there's like consequences to their actions. And that's what you need for stakes. So that sort of key unlocked the door to this world of a story that really had a lot of cohesion and coherence in the dream world, and that's really what got us the green light for this film. And so in the movie, you'll see we talk about this idea that if you can find the Sandman, he can make your dreams come true. And then your second question about how did we make the aesthetics of the design of the film, how did we think about that? Really, for me, it was, again, what you always try to do, for me as a director, you always ask the story what it needs. And so this film took place both in the dream world and in the real world, right? So I knew that I needed to create some sort of contrast between those two worlds. And so in animation, the advantage of animation is you can do anything stylistically, right? You can make it look really cartoony, you can make it look hyper real. So there's so many options. So where do you start? And because I knew we needed to create contrast between the real world and the dream world, I knew I couldn't make the real world too pushed and exaggerated. Because if you did that, once you got into the dream world, you'd have nowhere to go, right? So that really sort of grounded the aesthetic of the dream world and the humans. And that gave us a starting place so that when we got to the dream world, you could really push the design, and you'll see we end up doing that. The characters at some point, they turn into like full anime versions of themselves. And so it's a really nice, fresh, unexpected departure in the film, and it really helps set up the expansiveness of the dream world and what could happen in the dream world.
Excellent, thank you. So I want to learn more about your pipeline.
Okay.
So we're nerds about that.
Yeah.
So how do you approach at Kuku Studios? When you want a particular look, like have you been blessed with having tools been made available to you? And if you do want customized tools, do you guys have talent or approaches to make that happen?
Yeah. I mean, so our business model is that we do all the front end. So we come up with the ideas for either the TV show or the film. We put the pitches together, we get the financing, we get the green light, and then our company does story, editorial, and art, right, which is all pre-production. And then we hire a pipeline. So for our kids show, Gogo Corey Carson, we hired a company called Superprod, which is based in Paris. For In Your Dreams, we hired Sony Pictures Imageworks. So we did not want to be a vertically integrated pipeline studio because it's so expensive. There was no way we could compete with the bigger studios that way. So our strategy is we want to stay small, we focus on the front end, we focus on sort of that primary layer of creativity. And then once we get backing from a studio, then we can hire the sort of the secondary and the tertiary creative portions of that pipeline. So, you know, we don't really think about pipeline that much until we get the green light. And because our team is focused on the front end and what the design of the film ultimately looks like, it's really the job of the pipeline to figure out how to get us what we want. You know?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I wonder when you offer that, set up that relationship with your pipeline company, do you influence at all like what tools or what approach they use, or is it just like here's the budget, for example, and you make it work?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of conversations with the teams about what we think would be the ideal approach. We really let them lead on that because they know their own tools, they know their own pipeline, they know their own technology. So we don't try to impose any kind of tools onto them.
Is there, so my only interest would be like, I think in particular, do you have any restrictions on AI usage?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we did not use any AI on any of our productions. Mostly, I mean, it's not because it's like a philosophical aversion to it or hostility to it, but when our film was in production, it was 2020. We got the green light. We finished it around in 2024, like end of 2024. So the AI tools just weren't available at the time. I will say that I'm not. I don't really like the aesthetics that AI tools have been able to generate, at least the ones that are available to the consumers. So it's not that interesting to me, but the tools are continuing to develop over time. So, I don't have any sort of philosophical opposition to using artificial intelligence. I do think that there's somewhat of a misunderstanding about, I guess there's a differentiation between AI and machine learning, because visual effects companies and pipelines have been using machine learning for decades. And there's overlap in those two things, right? And I don't really have a problem with machine learning at all. I don't think anybody does, because it just helps you. I mean, that's really the power of the tool, right? Like when you're doing crowd simulations, or you're doing, hair and effects or textures. I mean, that machine learning really helps. It really empowers you as an artist. I think the stuff that people are uncomfortable with is a lot of the agentic stuff, right? Where it feels like you're sort of removing the crafts portion of it, or the craftsman part of it, and the human connections, and then you're also scraping all this data and not sort of compensating the rights holders or the people who have like generated this data or the image for them to train on. I think that's the sort of the ethical concern that people have. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer of saying that we don't use AI. And whether or not we'll use it in the future, I have no idea. But it's not something that I think about that much. I mean, my primary concern is I really think about the story, the look of the film, and then how can we actually execute that in a way that's at the highest level of artistry for the audience.
So we sometimes wear another hat as educators within the industry, and we try to help aspiring artists, students think about how to position themselves in the future. For future artists, it might be, especially in Asia, I feel, that they would think more about, should AI become part of my toolkit?
Yeah.
How should, in your, if you were to give some like future artist advice, what should they spend time on? I mean, they have limited time, even if it's like, say, 4 years of college.
Yeah.
Should they spend more time learning about aesthetics and art and appreciation, or is it about storytelling? Is it, technical tools and skills? Like, there's so much that they can learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to what their end goal is, right? I think for me, I mean, the sort of the equivalent for me was when I was in college, the digital revolution in animation was happening. It had already started, really, and it started with Toy Story. I graduated from college in 2003 and 2004. And at that point, I mean, I originally wanted to work in 2D animation. I wanted to be a 2D animator because I love drawing. But all of those jobs were vanishing because audiences weren't going to 2D animation movies anymore because they were so fascinated by this new medium of CG. And so really, a lot of our professors just told us, like, if you want a job after school, you should probably learn how to use the computer, right? And I tried learning how to animate on the computer, and I could do it, but it just was not enjoyable for me. Like, I found the process so unintuitive and really clunky because I spent my whole life drawing and learning that skill, and that's what I wanted to continue doing. That's what just brought me a lot of joy. And so I made the shift. I decided, okay, I'm not going to be an animator anymore because if I'm an animator, I have to learn how to use the computer, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep drawing, and so what can I do that's going to allow me to keep drawing? And that was doing story work. So how this relates to your question is it really comes down to what it is you want to do, right? I really wanted to keep drawing, and so I found a position and a role within the pipeline or in the industry that allowed me to do that, and that's what I cared about. And so, you know, if I decided to make the switch and do computer animation, learn computers, I think I probably could have done it. I would have been fine. I would have been, you know, I would have probably gotten a job as an animator somewhere, but I don't think I would have been as satisfied personally. So I think it really comes down to what it is you want to, what you care about, what you want to do with your time on a daily basis. If you don't like using technology, but you force yourself to do it because you needed to get a job, I don't know if it will actually serve you in the long run, because I think you have to be interested in something to really excel at it. And so I really loved drawing and I loved storyboarding. So that's why first of all, I love drawing. That led me into storyboarding, and then I fell in love with the art and the craft of storyboarding. And then the next layer under that is writing and directing. So yeah, I don't know, that would be my sort of response.
No, yes, I think that's great advice. I want to circle back on the tooling aspect. So I wonder at Kuku, if you're focusing more on the story development, have you found any luck with technology that aids and accelerates that process? Or is it very hand?
Yeah, it's kind of old school. I mean, really coming up with ideas, I mean, where do they come from? I mean, who knows, you know? But for me, it's very collaborative. Like I really, it's a combination of having sort of alone time to think about ideas, and then testing out those ideas with my creative partners, and having great conversations with them about it. And I feel like that's the way that I generate ideas, is having sort of a spark or a seed of an idea come from who knows where, when I'm in the shower or something, or I'm in the car, and then testing out those ideas, pitching it to somebody that I trust creatively, and then having them reflect back to me, oh, that's cool, and then they can kind of build on it, right? Yeah, I think that creativity is, it's when you combine two things, right, that don't normally sort of exist together, and then you create something new. So this idea of creative synthesis. And so collaboration is a really important part of that equation to me.
So my last question. So obviously you're at SIGGRAPH running your new film, but what's next for you? What's on your mind in terms of future ideas? Do you have scripts in development already, and more stories to tell? Yeah,
of course. So I have another original animated feature that I'm going to be pitching around town, probably after award season, you know. So that's something I'm really excited about. I have another actually live action TV show that I'm putting together, I'm developing, so I'll pitch that sometime in the spring when it's ready, maybe in the summer. And then we have another kids show that's really far along in development at Netflix, and so we're hoping we can get a green light sometime next year. So just a lot of irons in the fire. I mean, the way Hollywood works and the way the movie industry works is you have to have a lot of you just have to have a lot of material because you just never know when a studio is going to bite, right? And so you can't just hold on to one idea and try and push that up the hill because it can take forever, and so much of it is timing. So, you know, In Your Dreams took 9 years for us to make. We came up with it in the beginning of 2017. We pitched it around town. Nobody was interested in it. So we sat on it for like 3 or 4 years. And it wasn't until 2019 that we got our opportunity to actually get a script greenlit and written. And then after we wrote the script, it was 2020, we got the production greenlight. So in the meantime, if I was just sitting there waiting for 4 years, you know, for Netflix to give us the opportunity to write the script, you know, our company would have gone bankrupt. So you have to have a bunch of different projects that are in various stages ready to go, because you just never know which one's going to catch fire.